We shall end the illusion of immortality, part 2, next month, with thoughts about how we might begin to live more fully by giving up our immortality fantasies. The search for immortal life, the denial of death, has fueled a great deal of human civilizations and their development. Perhaps we might try to develop better conditions on this planet for the people living on it. Perhaps, just perhaps, we might stop trying to accumulate fortunes or fame or conquest that we fantasize will outlast us. Perhaps if we give up these immortality fantasies, we shall stop enriching religions by our adherence to their practices and to their greed. And just perhaps, we might finally begin to live. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Very good.
To life.
To life.
You mentioned Thomas Willis was 1664, he published his work.
Yeah.
But why did it take so long for them to do a clear anatomy of the brain? Why was it so long?
I would suppose that maybe the church didn't like it, and maybe they didn't have the right instruments or whatever, or the right...
I mean, he must not have had anything more than a microscope. I don't know what he would have
Well,
been
when did
missing.
they develop microscopes?
Well, that was, Galileo, and that was before that was
Yeah,
before
yeah,
Willis. That
so-
was earlier even,
I would think that their minds just weren't prepared for it, and there was probably resistance on the part of the church and people.
Remember, chopping up bodies was not.
Yeah, I remember you weren't
They were
supposed to do.
separating screwing up the body for resurrection by chopping
Yeah, or
it up.
something, there was something like,
Something like that.
very
Yeah, no.
wrong about it, so it was outlawed, although they
Yeah.
were purchasing bodies from, the grave robbers.
Interesting.
Surely Leonardo was doing something like that, or somebody was supplying him, because he had the anatomy pretty down perfect. So you notice that already in the Renaissance they were doing this.
Yeah. Look at it. Listen to the rain.
Yeah,
Oh my God,
coming
here it
down
comes.
heavy.
I'm glad. You didn't mention Freud's death instinct. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah, he discovered it when he was dying of the cancer.
Discovered, yeah.
Yeah.
So, does this bear any relevance to this topic?
Well, I thought it was like, getting kind of far afield because, yeah, I mean, I was trying to discuss the reasons we have for trying to avoid death.
Yeah. So this is one of the more bizarre features of Freudianism, is this idea that we have an innate instinct towards death. So,
I think he might be partially correct.
but
I'm not sure.
But it, first of all, it contradicts so much of what you said in the lecture about the wish to
Yeah.
be immortal.
Yeah, but remember,
Not
he
that.
studied that too,
So why, but in studying that, in studying and covering everything you have about the fantasies that were created around surviving, is why would we possibly have a death instinct? It just is so counterintuitive to everything.
To make us accept death a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, my own opinion is Freud was so far off base with this, and there was very little evidence. What he was trying to explain is why do people act in self-destructive ways,
Okay.
and that he couldn't come up with a cohesive answer, so he just sort of invented this Deus ex machina of you just got to have a wish to be dead. You must have a wish. But just wondering what
That's
you thought about that.
interesting. No, I just didn't want to go there,
You mentioned that when we're young, we fear death less
Yeah.
than when we're old. But do you have any supporting evidence for that, or because that may not necessarily, certainly it hasn't been my personal experience.
I think young people feel that they're rather immortal and that death is far off and that nothing will happen to them. I mean, how would you persuade, young men, we need their bodies to go into war because they're young and healthy, but how would you persuade them other than the fact that at some level at least they feel that they're imperishable?
Well, I can come out of this experience.
Yeah.
How would you raise an army if the young were extremely fearful of death?
Yeah. Yeah, to me that's the biggest argument against war is the idea you're sending all of these children basically to death. But yes, that would be the empirical evidence, I believe, is you're correct, is that these people think that they're going to live forever. They do very dangerous things we all have in our youth, and say, wow, we never do that now. But that's only, that's the, this one layer, but below that, if you say, do you know someday your parents are going to die? They would be I think, much more fearful
Sure.
of losing their parents
Sure.
even as a 20-year-old, even as a young adult.
Oh, yeah,
If I told them, you're gonna lose your parents,
yes,
that would terrify them.
yes.
Whereas as a 50-year-old, if you say, well, you're going to lose your parents, they're not going to be so terrified.
They don't seem to be, but I think many people are underneath. I think they have a hard time, getting over it. I mean, they maybe accept it more because they become more aware of it. They've seen more death. And there comes a point when you've seen enough death and experienced enough people that you know have died, that you accept it. But are you any less terrified? I don't think so. I'm not sure.
But that's what's trying to, I use that to support my point that I think actually older people, you may be accepted from that, fear death less. That you just sort of understand that, you've seen it, you feel that you've lived a very long life.
I still fear it. I still fear it.
Of course.
And so you fear it more, you're saying you fear it more now as a 70-year-old?
Maybe differently. How's that?
So that
Well,
if
I had thoughts of immortality. I was just gonna go on,
Yeah,
when I was younger, much younger.
yeah.
Thought
me
about
too,
it.
me
And
too.
if some jerk had come along and sat down and said, now you're gonna lose your parents, aren't you gonna have a fear of their death? And I would say, buzz off.
So
Look at them. They've lived this long. You kidding me?
There you are.
They're a pain in the neck right now. You think they're going to go away and not be a
Yeah.
pain in the neck anymore?
So you would deny even that your
They would
parents...
deny it. I think they would deny it. Because
I mean, we know,
history
we say
says that they're
yes,
right in front of me all this time.
Yeah.
They're going to, well, what's going to interfere with that?
I think we know that they're going to die, but at another level, we don't accept it. And when they die, there is like somewhat of a shock. I mean, a lot of people say, even when somebody's been ill a long time, fatally ill, so you're
It's a shock.
expecting the death.
Yeah.
When it actually comes, it's still, a shock, as it were. It's something that's hard to accept. And yet, the person may have been on this downward slope a year or 2 years, and it doesn't matter. They don't accept
It
it.
was obvious they were going to die.
Yeah, but this cognitive understanding is that if you get exposed to something over and over again, you see people die, you know others that die, you know of the deterioration of your own body. How is it that it could be any more fearful? I'm trying to understand, because you are older than myself, is that why would you be more afraid of it rather than just more calm? Maybe calm is the word.
Because it's closer.
You've consigned yourself to it instead.
Well, no, but it's closer. I mean, you never accept it, really. I'm not sure. I mean, perhaps if you're very, very ill and you're fading, but even then I wonder if we really do all the way. Remember, we're biologically
tuned to
tuned
survive.
to that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we try not to go easily.
But do you know of any sociologist who has studied this, or psychologist who has polled people, say at 20, at 40, at 60, and saying, what do you feel about death now? What do you feel about death?
That's interesting. I don't know. There might have been several
Okay.
studies, but I do not have access to them, and I'm not aware of them.
Okay.
That would be interesting to follow up.
Let's try to stick with just questions until I've exhausted those.
Sure.
You never really offered us a definition, if it's possible, of the soul. What is the soul?
Well, that's it. No one seems to know. It varied with church theologian to church theologian, church
But is it-
father to church father.
So it's an immutable, whatever it is, it's immutable?
It's immutable, and you have it at the moment of when the egg and the sperm come together and they're
Yeah.
fertilized.
But it's not the same as personality. It's not your...
Well, they feel it. The personality is embodied in that in some way. Many of them do.
And that your character is embodied?
Yeah, many of them do. It depends on which religious person you're talking to, especially nowadays. I would think that church fathers, earlier on, really believed that firmly. I think now it varies from person to person. The more science knocks these things out, the more varied the
Mhm.
thinking is, if
Okay.
you noticed, yeah.
Yes. I'll need a definition. I'm sorry, I haven't actually read the lecture. The monists?
That's usually materialists and atheists and secular people, although not necessarily all of them, but where the matter is made up of one like substance, basically.
So it's the
We
same.
don't believe in like dualism, body and soul. Now we use it more loosely to, like that the brain and the soul are, and the consciousness are, embedded together and part of it. If you're religious, you believe in dualism. You believe in a body and a soul.
So monist meaning one, mono.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So would be the same as materialist?
Very close, except now, of course, they know that all matter is in one substance, so that's been, shelved. But we still use it in terms of materialism. And for the secular people, that's a good thing, and for theists, that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because they're all dualists.
Very interesting. Have you seen the movie Sixth Sense, and how does that?
I'm sorry, I haven't seen it, so you'll have to.
You haven't
talk
seen
about
the
it.
Sixth Sense? When you talked earlier in the lecture about the denial of death, that we all go through most of our lives denying that we are mortal. This whole movie is the basis of the entire movie, because this guy really is dead, but he doesn't know it. He refuses
Oh, wait a minute.
to accept the evidence that he is dead.
Is it the Bruce Willis, or is it that Kevin Bacon one?
No, it's Bruce Willis
We've seen it.
who was killed.
No, we have seen it.
You have seen it.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
he
we
keeps
could-
talking to everybody. Yeah,
He's talking
he
to
tricks
people,
us.
and he tricks us, and
Yeah.
he tricks maybe himself
Yeah.
into thinking that he's still alive.
Yeah.
When he's dead.
Yeah, I don't know. We
The
have
boy
seen it.
talks-
It's very good.
You
Yeah.
see, so obviously, that's all fantasy, but it is making a statement, a claim, an argument the same way you are, is that we are in this constant denial of death.
Well, do you remember the Sartre no exit? It takes them for a while.
That to even realize that they're dead?
Right, and I've seen other movies, I can't remember the title of it, where people are in this like waiting room, maybe it's called the waiting room.
Oh,
I can't, we saw, it's a
Yeah.
foreign film, and it's like, they don't realize for a long time, they just do not come to the realization, they finally, accept the fact that they're dead, but it takes a good long time through the movie. And it's very traumatic for them.
Most of my other remarks are comments. So Jim, did you have any questions before I
No,
go
right
into
ahead.
comments? I don't want to spend too much time on any one of these, but first of all, there is now at the Birmingham Library, they are having the Death Cafe, and they're getting someone from hospice,
Oh my God,
getting people together just to talk about death.
oh God.
You don't have to, be ill, terminally ill or anything. They say, let's get together and let's talk about death.
To me, I think there's something unhealthy about a culture that focuses so much on death as we have recently.
Well, but wouldn't you say that these people have been realists? I mean, this is.
It doesn't work, that's what I was trying to.
But it's against this denialism that you were talking about in the whole lecture.
Yeah, it does.
I
but
think the
it-
purpose of this, what you're saying there, and if we look into the literature, is to get people to accept the fact that they are going to die.
Yeah.
I don't think it's to
Well,
prolong.
that's what the workshop was doing. We pictured our own death, he said if you ask people, about when the leaves turn and stuff, that I remember that was kind of funny. We all consider that very appropriate and what have you, but we don't consider our own ending appropriate,
Mhm.
Because you mentioned Heidegger and it said that it's an inauthentic state.
Yes, it is.
To refuse to face death.
Yeah.
So why not encourage, why not have more of this?
Well, I
discussion?
think it's a good thing, I'm not saying, I just don't think it works, to tell you the truth, but.
It doesn't
Probably
work
it helps a little bit.
To do what?
I think it doesn't work as much as people think it is.
To
that,
do-
We're gonna
do
face
what?
death now.
To do what?
We're going
What?
to face
What?
death,
It's not gonna change, obviously it's not gonna change the
No,
outcome.
it doesn't change anything, I know, because I went through that whole seminar, I thought,
But-
why
but
did I
that's not
waste
the-
my money?
But Mary, that's not the
See, people are in denial of death, and they go into these hospices and they don't believe they're going to die. And the families that come in and visit them don't believe that the person's, they have a hard time accepting the fact that I think what they're trying to do with the workshop is to get people to accept the fact that they're going to, that there's death.
All right, well,
I think that's what
I'm not
think of
against it.
hospice.
I think hospice is a wonderful
Yeah,
idea.
I think that's what the hospice people are trying to do.
I mean, I surely intend to use it, if I, get in that situation where I have
Yeah.
time to, figure out what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
What the hospice people would say is that people call them way too late, is that it's always a crisis and then they're called in.
I think they say that people aren't there usually even 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And, some of it is because the doctors, keep giving the family false hope. I remember when my mother was in critical and just dying, the doctor, every time he came in, would say, oh, she's rallied before, I've seen people rally from that, and they kind of give you I think they don't want to face it, the patient is going. So then they give you false hope, and then they keep themselves going. It's a nasty situation,
Very nasty.
I mean, they mean well, but yeah. But I think that they don't want to sign real soon. I think you probably have to push some of them a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, but people do go in much later than they need to, because they can go in up in about 6 months.
Another thought that came out of the soul concept is that a self-identity is required to have a soul. So one must have this concept. In order to have the concept of soul, you have to have a concept of a self. But modern psychology and neuroscience says there really is no self. We're constantly changing.
Yes, that's true.
Every day of our lives.
That's
We're
true.
a different self.
Yeah,
And so somebody at 50 is a different self than somebody who's at 40.
right.
It goes along with the changing of the particles in the cells in the body.
Yeah.
How's the soul supposed to keep up with that change?
Yeah. Nietzsche said the same thing, right? Is that we're
Yes,
changing
he thought so.
self.
Hume thought so,
Hume, okay.
yeah.
I find that much more relevant, and if you had told me that 10 years ago, I may not have accepted that, because a psychoanalyst would say, no, you have an unconscious and a conscious, and it's pretty well
Right.
constant unless you go through therapy. It's stable throughout your life.
Yeah.
So if you had your father issues as a 20-year-old and you didn't work through them, you still have your father issues as a 40-year-old.
Well, people seem to frequently, so I'm not sure, but it seems to be, I know when Hume said that, he looked inside himself, he didn't see anything permanent, but he saw like these passing moods. And the Buddhists will say that, people that meditate, they say that these are all like passing moods.
Yes, but the Western idea is that you're bipolar because
Yeah.
you don't have a self.
Right.
You're abnormal because you don't have one mood.
Exactly.
You have a high or a low,
Yeah.
or maybe just
Yeah.
a low. And so
Well,
that's
that-
abnormal.
I think we're at the point where we're not, we're in transition and we haven't accepted it totally. But I remember that when I first encountered this idea, it was especially when I encountered deconstruction and just all those modern ideas, and there was a lot of discussion of this kind of thing, and then I started to realize that they're probably right. But it's almost impossible. You know how the Buddhists tell you, like to meditate, you are anger. It isn't anger that overtakes you, it's you that is the anger and what have you. And it's your ego when somebody aggravates you or insults you, and you're you get angry and it's unnecessary because this is just some phony ego that's been, and I never found that it brought me any less anger.
I wonder what they did with that teaching when they could come pouring out of the monasteries with their staves and their sticks and their spears
Just fight,
and fight
yeah.
like crazy in the
Yeah.
towns.
Well, that's religious hypocrisy, but I think that they probably are correct in that perception. But it has never personally helped me one bit. I get just as mad as I ever did.
Sure.
I get just as happy as I ever did. So what can I say? You know, I know it's all ego. And as Jung said too, that the unconscious, if you want to accept that theory, you know, which is kind of going out the window, but because I've read a lot of his work, he said that and I don't accept a lot of things he said or what he believed, but he said that the unconscious keeps going, sees itself as going on always. It has no concept of death, no concept of an end. So that's part of, he thought, what was driving us, you know.
To believe in immortality.
Yeah, and he thought that the only way, you know, like to deal with it really was to just keep on with whatever you're doing till you die. And I think that that's a reasonable thing. It's probably one of the most reasonable things he ever said,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, that ties in with the idea that was put out that the unconscious is timeless.
Yes, that's exactly what he said. He said
Yeah.
he used that word timeless.
And from the point of view of a child doesn't remember being born or
No.
never having existed.
Yeah,
So the self, or this child self, would have very difficult understanding of that you will end in your existence as well. You don't remember the beginning, and so it would be hard to conceive of an ending.
of course, yeah.
But I do remember in Chicago as a 6-year-old that I did finally understand, you know, what death was. Just thinking rationally as a 6-year-old about it, that it really was a terminal point. That my adult understanding, I think, was reached at least a little. That this really meant this was the end of Norm. This was the end of Norman. This was
I don't
not-
know if I had that,
It's probably
that
consciousness
consciousness.
that I understood that it was oblivion. It was not just going to heaven.
How did you understand that though?
You know, I would like to, it wasn't for any one individual. I don't think because of someone who died. Nobody had died at that point. I was just contemplating what was this mean to have a life and then not to have a life.
Did your father officiate at funerals?
Absolutely, yeah, he made
Did you
good money at it.
participate?
No, I wasn't even allowed to go as a 7-year-old. My grandmother died, but that would have been afterwards. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral.
But you knew that your father officiated
It would've-
at funerals with people's deaths.
It would have
You knew
come up,
people-
yeah.
You knew people were dying.
Yeah, certainly,
Okay.
it would have come up.
I
Yeah,
think-
I had to
yeah.
walk and make that understanding that people get old, and then
Mhm.
what happens after that,
Mhm.
eventually, there's a terminal.
Yeah.
point
Hey, these
where-
people are all
where
dying.
Consciousness
Yeah.
is gone,
Yeah.
there's no other existence.
I didn't feel it touched me though, really. I mean, I think the only time I think I was afraid of death was, I think I was about 4, and I fell backward in the water, and sometimes kids can drown like that, you know, in very shallow water, and I couldn't get up.
Oh, dear.
And I was like, you know, really, you know, sputtering and you know, the relief when, you know, somebody noticed that was swimming near us and, you know, yanked me out, you know. So I think there was some sense, or at least the organism was afraid.
Uh-huh.
You know, I don't know how much my, you know, brain was comprehending,
Hmm.
but my whole organism, like, you know, was fighting, you know, to live, you know, as it were, you know. So I'm not sure. Other than that, I mean, yeah, I remember going to funerals and getting scared. I remember going to the Toledo Museum and seeing the mummies, and then having, like, you know, bad dreams for a couple of weeks. You know, my mother being very annoyed because we went for a cultural experience.
And the culturalist.
Yeah. Well, that was a fun time, you know. But, you know, I mean, they were like dead, you know, but I was scared of them. You know, I don't know. I don't know how much I really comprehended about terminal. I knew old people died, that you know.
I'd like to go back and visit this desire for others to survive, you know, to deal with unresolved conflicts.
Yeah, that's
you know,
important.
Mine, but you know, accepting the fact of the death of someone as an end of all. What difference does it make whether you resolve that issue or not? Because certainly they have no conscious idea that it's been unresolved.
But they're alive in your brain.
But you have the unresolved conflict. And the thought is, maybe, that if I had done this and done that, I would have resolved the conflict.
I mean, I often have why was I so impatient with my mother at times, you know?
Mhm.
Like, why wasn't I more patient? I mean,
So isn't that a desire to go back and do it differently?
yeah,
But isn't that different than say, I want this person back now so that I could tell them I'm sorry, or so I could...
sure, that you love them and that you're sorry and that, you know.
Now, after you've told them that, see, now this has always bothered me. After I tell them that, Mom, I'm sorry I was so short with you all the time. What are you gonna do with the person you've called back? You gonna send them back? Now get out of here?
Well, that, you just want it back the way they were, even if they were a pain in the butt, you know, all right?
Mhm.
To be quite honestly, yeah,
Okay.
because you loved them at some point,
I understand.
you know, despite their
Yes.
flaws.
Yeah.
And, you know, you'll probably be just as impatient with them if they, you know,
Well, you
got
better,
your wish.
about 24 hours.
Yeah, it was about 24 hours or 48 hours, you'd be hollering at
Right
them.
back at the same
Or, you know,
crap.
it's like, oh my God, they're driving me nuts.
Good-
But you
good
see-
insight.
But you see, there is that love too,
Mhm.
you know, even
Of
if they're
course.
driving you crazy, you know.
So it's, do you think the more it's just you miss them, you want them back, rather than saying, I want to make up for...
Well, it's everything, Maybe you didn't have anything to make up.
No, I mean, I feel the same way with my brother. It's not, I'm not immune to it, but I also know that there's nowhere that he's now in pain for whatever pain I caused him.
Right, but you're in the pain.
But is that a rational?
No.
That's not
But-
really rational.
Yeah, no, but so, you know, we're not always rational animals.
Of course,
you
the
know, we have-
individual, living individual wants to discharge that and get it out of their system. But they feel that there's no way to get it out of the system because the person's not here.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people who tell me, I'm certainly, you know, when my father was dying, and also just in general, they say, well, you ought to have closure with your parents before they go.
Well, that's the platitude, the psychological platitude. I don't know that that's always so necessary.
Is that a religious idea, that you have to have some kind of closure with the people that are going to heaven, or that are...
I don't know, I don't think so, because if you believe they're going to heaven, you know, then
What's
you
your problem?
you can make it up later.
We'll catch up with you
Or that
there.
their soul has to be at peace by, you know, you saying goodbye and saying, I love you, I'm sorry, or, you know, whatever, that you have to leave their their immortal soul with this consolation, or...
And it's more for yourself, I think,
Yeah.
but it's for them too,
Because I hear from people saying, oh, I wish I had told my father before he died, I wish I had told him that I loved him. And they're all broken up, and they'll go into tears about they never told their father they
Yes,
loved him, and now
yes,
he's dead.
yes.
I told both my parents and I still go into
Yeah.
tears, so, I mean,
Yes.
what can I say?
Yes,
Yeah.
and isn't it interesting?
I mean, I was lucky I was able to be there and I was able to
There are
talk.
people who don't believe in immortality, yourself, for example, who feel this, and there are people who do believe in immortality, and yet they feel the same way. But wait a minute. If you believe in immortality, aren't you going to catch up with them?
Mhm.
Just tell them that.
Well, that's the desire.
Well, yeah, and that's why you cling to immortality even when you don't believe it. You know, people are living both things, so I wish I had done it, and I'll be able to do it.
So it'd be
You see,
more
yeah,
complicated.
yeah, there's a lot of like delusion and irrationality
Huh.
in this issue.
This
Yeah,
is
but
fascinating.
as atheists, I mean, I'm trying to reach a more rational point of view, to say, what is it? It is rational to say, I wish I had done something different, but yeah, I don't think it is rational to say, I want this person back so that I can tell them that I wish I had done something different, or that I can tell them.
Well,
that I
that
love
is
them.
more rational, but I don't think we always work as rational animals, you know.
Hmm.
You know, we have a lot of fantasies and
Hmm.
illusions and what have you. There's a well-known psychologist, I can't think of his name right off the bat right now, but he's very well thought of, and he almost elaborating on this point, you know, he says it's very easy to put all these fantasies and things to the afterlife because, you know, except for Jesus, you know, nobody's really come back to report on it. So it's this kind of like unknown thing, and you can just load it up with any
With any
fantasy you
fantasy
want. And I thought that was a very sensible, thing that he said.
or ideal that you
Yeah.
might have,
This is cool, yeah.
Now- now
I'll
I'm
drive
thinking
a
that-
yellow Cadillac.
or the movie Ghost,
Yeah,
when he's killed suddenly.
yeah,
And he's able to come back as
Yeah.
Whoopi Goldberg.
yeah,
And, I don't know if he makes love with his wife one more time or something like that.
yeah, I can't remember, I
You
don't
know.
think we saw the thing, I think we saw the trailers,
Well, and my mother also was very affected by the death of her parents. And after my grandmother died, we had to say prayers every night before we went to bed.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And she would tell us what to say, and then we would say it.
Yeah, it's,
And then
it's
so
how-
she had to add, but at the very end of the prayer, we would say, God bless mommy, daddy, sister, brother. She would say, in Booby and Zadie, which is grandma and grandfather, in a better world in heaven. Here.
The little Christian prayer,
Now,
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless this bed that I lay on, and if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That's the one that I used to say every night, and a lot of kids did.
So
There
what
was some sense of death.
Yeah, they had to instill
Yeah,
it.
I could be kicking off, but I don't think any of us believed it was just some prayer to tell.
Wouldn't follow that thought through.
Did
As a
you
kid?
follow it through?
No.
What did you do? Did you have that prayer too?
Yeah,
What did
used
you
to
do?
rock with it.
To
Prayed
turn
over
into
by
the
the
body
priest,
of blood of
converted to the
Jesus,
So
and
that
it
was
has to
the
go
blood
of
through a
Christ.
thing during the mass, the priest. I read a funny thing about that. William, no, it wasn't William James. Who was it? Was it? I can't remember now, but somebody that was like non-religious was. I know it was Jefferson. Hocus pocus, because the priest says, "This is my body." Hoc est corpus meum, and he would call it in his private letters to people the hocus pocus.
Hocus pocus.
And I think they think that that's where hocus pocus may have come from, putting down this, this is my body, this is my blood. Yeah, very funny. It was Jefferson.
So they say now we're much more insulated from death, that it's much more sanitized.
Sure. Oh, yeah, it's
We don't see
definitely
it.
more
We don't
sanitized.
see the.
When you see the European movies, the old European movies, they used to lay the body out, and the family members, the women usually would wash it and everything like that. So they were very close to death all the time. And farm animals would die, and they would be slaughtered. So death was like always present in your life, My father hated the idea of, old people lingering in the hospital. He just thought that was like, outrageous, and he talked about, the Greek village that he had left, and when somebody was obviously dying, you'd give them some broth or some milk, whatever they could, take, and it was usually a peaceful, process. They died, of whatever old age they had or whatever they had. He said he just hated that, with all the medications and the oxygen tanks, and,
Yeah. Because that also is inauthentic. That is really a fear of death, trying
Sure.
to keep them alive at all costs.
Right, yeah,
When really,
Welcome to the American medical system.
you're not facing the ultimate reality. of
maybe
what's
they
gonna
don't
happen.
wanna face it either, and of course, they make a lot of money with that non-facing too.
Yeah, but it's a collusion though, of people who have an emotional attachment to
That's
this
right.
person that
That's
won't
right.
let go.
Yeah,
And then the doctor, of course, who's providing the technical
Yeah.
means. This is very interesting. So you didn't mention euthanasia. Is that going to come up as a?
no, I'm not gonna, mention it in this coming one, because, that's again a choice of death, and I'm trying to talk about all the ways
Immortality
we're
and
trying
lack of
to
it.
evade it. Yeah, because,
But the religious, it's primarily a religious objection
yes,
is euthanasia.
yeah,
Not
which I just
completely.
hate, yeah.
But I think that there's maybe some future discourse.
Well, I did mention it in my ethics, if you recall, the practical ethics part that I read.
Yes, that's in
How
there.
they oppose it, and so they're taking away our rights, to choose.
Mhm. Another choice.
Another choice, it's like birth control and thing, and again, that's the fact of the soul, and that God has that disposition of it. He decides the last minute when it departs the body, not you, It's not your fucking choice,
Now, what if you don't believe in a soul?
Yeah.
Well, they don't care, they believe in the
Well,
soul.
we do,
They
and
don't
that's
care
the-
whether you believe it or not.
That's the law.
Yeah, they believe in it, and yeah, they're, we should be having, euthanasia, or whatever you call it, suicide, assisted suicide.
Assisted
Yeah,
suicide.
assisted suicide in every state in this country. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And first of all, what was the fantasy about that? That people were gonna run to do it. I mean,
Everybody's gonna
it's
move to the
against-
state of Washington.
Yeah, it's against our psychologies, it's against our biology. I mean, you have to push yourself to do this.
But this is this is growth panic. This is what happens when you're faced with new possibilities.
Yeah,
They become so scary that you imagine the worst.
yeah,
Of
the
course
the
that
world
never happens.
moving there or running there
Yeah.
to just, people just running in groves. I mean, all right, marijuana I can understand,
Well, they're not going to run to marijuana either.
Well, yeah, of course not, but you know what I mean, I can imagine that fantasy, like everybody's gonna wanna get high and then whoopee, and then
I think it's
everything.
bad now, wait till they
Yeah.
get this dope all over the
Yeah,
streets.
yeah, gay marriage, everybody's gonna, marry, and then they'll marry animals, I can understand that. But you really, 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 in any kind of rational or half rational or any kind of fantasy, think that people are going to run to go and ask for death? Unless they're really sick or in pain or they're mentally disturbed in some way. I mean, it's just not gonna happen.
Yeah.
And it hasn't.
But even
It hasn't.
George Shankar, who I've mentioned many times, he was a lifelong atheist. He was opposed to euthanasia. He thought it would be misused, that the government or the in-laws would take advantage of this and
Well,
use it to kill people.
but if there's, checks and balances put into place where you have to be evaluated, like, are you depressed, are you crazy, blah, 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 are you in your right mind, and why do you want it? And usually it's because people are very sick.
Mhm.
And, they don't want to go on in that suffering or
yeah.
helpless state, makes sense to me then. Thank you very much for a wonderful discussion.
Yay.